Hello again, it's the Employee of the Month. And I wanted to take a departure from the theological and comment upon the cultural and the protests that I am seeing daily covered on the news and the various media arms and the form that they are taking. One of the aspects of it that lets me know that the people that are part of this movement, whatever this movement is that seems so incensed that Donald Trump is now our president, they're using a word, fascist, and clearly they have no idea what that word means or what a fascist government actually is. If they did, they wouldn't be using the word. The reason I say that is, number one, if our government were actually a fascist government, if Donald Trump and the cabinet that he's installed and the various people of conservative bent in our government right now were fascists, there would be no protests, and you wouldn't have anybody in the media critical of Donald Trump's presidency because fascism does not allow dissent. That's the first problem I have with what's happening in our country. The second problem is a rather obvious one, and that is the form that this dissent is taking. We have in our country the right of dissent, and the dissent can take the form of public protest. We have that right. I have no difficulty with that at all. I think it's a wonder that we live in a culture wherein one can take to the streets with a sign or a bullhorn and shout and march, and if they see something within our government that they wish to criticize, they have the right to do so. That's a wonderful thing, and I would never want us to lose that. But when it takes the form of breaking windows, turning cars over, lighting fires, looting, beating people up, physically violent toward other people, then it's taken a different form. And what I think the people who are doing these things don't realize is that is exactly how the fascists rose up in the countries where fascism became the governmental system in Western Europe. All you've got to do is go back a bit in history and look at Germany prior to the rise of the National Socialists. There was a group, a grassroots group, who were followers of Adolf Hitler prior to his being Chancellor of Germany when he had no political clout whatsoever. They were called the Brown Shirts. They dressed in a certain outfit and uniform with the swastika on their armband, and they took to the streets. They took to the streets and they intimidated people, they beat people up, they broke windows, they lit fires, they burned books, they disrupted otherwise peaceful gatherings where those who were in support of the Kaiser, who was actually equivalated to our president in that country at the time, who would make speeches in support of the government that was in place, they would go in and disrupt those meetings, break things, turn vehicles over, light fires, and beat people up. Well, that's exactly whatever this movement is we've got going on in our country right now that is labeling Donald Trump as a fascist. These people who are protesting are taking a page right out of the National Socialists' playbook prior to Germany becoming Nazi Germany. So who's the fascist? Well, it seems very historically clear to me that the people who are engaged in these protests are now the fascists, because just like what took place on Berkeley, it is a direct comparison to the way in which those who followed Adolf Hitler prior to Germany becoming Nazi Germany behaved. They behaved in exactly the same way. What happened at Berkeley? Somebody was invited there to speak by the university, by some group on the university campus. They have that right as a place where in our country, I don't know much about this, it's before my time, where free speech was to be championed in our country on the campus of Berkeley. And they invited a person to come and speak, with which this group that is doing these organizing and orchestrating these protests around the country disagreed. That's fine. But instead of just standing outside the door in protest with signs and saying things to the people who were trying to get in to see this person speak, they grabbed the barricades that were being used to contain the lines. They used the barricades to then break the windows of the entrance to the auditorium where this person was to speak. They threw Molotov cocktails at the entrance to the auditorium and lit fires. They also physically and violently attacked some of the people who were lined up there to hear the person speak. It became so violent that they actually had to take this person who was going to speak and escort him away secretly from the campus so that no further violence toward him would ensue. That looks exactly like what took place via the brown shirts in Nazi Germany. So when we hear this word fascist being pitched about in the media, and what I find shocking even more so is that the media seem to be complicit in this. Instead of labeling what these protesters are doing with regard to the breaking of windows, the looting of shops, the lighting of fires, the turning over of cars, the destruction of innocent people's property, and taxpayer-owned property, by the way, in the case of Berkeley, instead of labeling that as what it is, they blame the entire event of the entire violence and the violent expression upon the person who was invited there to speak, as though that person is responsible for what happened outside. Just as when Donald Trump was running for president and there were violent protests at his campaign rallies, they blamed Donald Trump as a candidate for the violence that took place. This is a page right out of the National Socialists' playbook. The people who are orchestrating these protests, the media who are behind them, and the people who sit in the shadows who are financing all of this, they are the fascists. And make no mistake about it, if this is allowed to carry on to its full flower, we will become a fascist country. And they will be the ones in charge, the fascists themselves. So if you care about free speech, and if you care about this country in terms of the freedom for the people to protest, my advice would be to resist the fascists. And the fascists are the ones who are involved in these protests. Thank you so much. This is the Employee of the Month. Until next time.